Welcome to our council meeting for the 31st of May. Just a reminder that this meeting is being live streamed. We also have Councillor Maxwell joining us via Zoom today. Kia ora, Councillor Maxwell. And also a reminder to please ensure your mobile phones are turned off or silent. We will take a morning break about 11 a.m. I would like to invite Councillor O'Brien to open up our meeting with the karakia, please.
Thank you, Morena, Your Worship, fellow councillors. I summon from above, I summon from below, I summon from within, I summon the surrounding environment, the universal vitality and energy to infuse and enrich all present. Enriched, unified and blessed.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. Before we start our meeting, I have a very special acknowledgement to make. Councillor Maxwell, who is zooming in because he is actually in Wellington because he was recently made a Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit yesterday. So I'd like to have a vote of congratulations to Councillor Maxwell, and of course this acknowledgement of the New Zealand Order of Merit is an acknowledgement of a lifetime of service in local government for our community and of course for the Māori culture. So congratulations, Councillor Maxwell. We send you a heartfelt congratulations from our council and our Rotorua community, and we look forward to celebrating with you on your return. Congratulations. We'll now start our agenda for today. I'll call for any apologies. The only one I have received is from Councillor Kiriopa. May I please have a mover and a seconder to receive this apology? Moved by Councillor Waru, seconded by Councillor O'Brien. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any declarations of interest this morning? There appear to be none. Any urgent items not on the agenda? Yes, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand that the Council IT team have been working very hard over the last several years, building up to going live with a new cloud-based system. I understand that last week the old council systems went dark, shall we say, into read-only mode, and was today supposed to be the go-live day? I was just wondering if Council could give an update on how that project has progressed.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. Given the significance of the go-live date today, I will take a brief update from DCE Thomas Colley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, at about 11 o'clock last night, we did sign off the go-live of One Council, and a bit of the team worked through till about 1 o'clock, and 7:30 this morning it did go live. So that has replaced our old Ozone system, which effectively did all our property rating regulatory, and we also replaced our document management system, which included obviously the transfer of hundreds of thousands of documents into the new system. So over the next week we will see as to, obviously that stage one has been successful with very little interruption, and then going forward we'll see the impacts of the new system with regards to how staff work and interact with our community. So yes, it was very pleasing.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to you and the team as well.
Thank you.
I do have one urgent item to include on the agenda. This is the matter of the Audit and Risk Committee appointment of independent chair. Just want to advise that this is an urgent item needing to be dealt with because it was not on the agenda as interviews and reference checks were still being undertaken at the same time the agenda was being published. So may I please have a mover and a seconder for the motion that the matter of Audit and Risk Committee appointment of independent chair be able to be dealt with at this meeting. Thank you, Councillor Kaifong and Councillor Patterson, and this will be dealt with in the confidential section where we have a CV, an application, and we have had interviews and wish to proceed with appointment of that person. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour to add that to the agenda, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. We move to our confirmation of minutes. This is on page 6 of our agenda. May I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes of council meeting held on 26th of April be confirmed as true and correct? Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Kai Fong. All those in favour that they are true and correct? Any against? Thank you. We start our staff reports today with the financial performance for the 10 months ended 30th of April. I'd like to invite our DC Thomas Colley and also David Jensen, Director of Finance, I believe, to the table to speak to a presentation. May I please have a mover and a seconder to receive this report for financial performance for 10 months ended 30th of April, moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor O'Brien. Put that to the vote to receive the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Over to you, Thomas and David.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and once again, good morning, councillors. Financial performance for the 10 months ended April. There we go. So as you recall, over the last 5 to 6 months, we have talked about some of the significant pressures that the organisation has been under, and also responding to some of the challenges around our community. And many of those challenges have driven cost into our organisation. And as we've talked about over the months, we've worked hard towards offsetting and mitigating those. So you recall, again, the main pressures are a result of the emergency housing plan changes and the response and the costs around those resource consents. It has felt like it hasn't stopped raining since 1979, I don't know, but particularly June last year. And so it's no surprise that we've had to respond to significant weather events, a couple of cyclones, etc. We've also, the world that we live in has experienced high inflation, and we are operating in that high inflationary environment at a time when our budgets had little to no inflationary response. And so what we've done in response to that is cancelled and deferred expenditure where appropriate, put extra rigour on top of approval of expenditure. We've deferred recruitments where we can, and we have targeted additional revenues where possible. And just, I'll skip a little bit ahead. And so back in December, we were signalling to you that there was a potential for the organisational deficit to extend out to about 5.4 million, and that's that yellow line with regards to where the forecast was. And at that time, we were tracking about 1.4, 1.5 million behind budget. And as we put those mitigations and implemented strategies to offset it, we revised that forecast down again back in January after spending the Christmas period looking at what we were doing and how we were doing it, and it was revised down to about 2.9 million. And now, at the last meeting, we'd signalled that we were aiming towards a goal of being within 1% of budget. And as you can see there on that green line is that the measures have been effective. So we haven't seen an uplift or a skyward trajectory with regards to that deficit, and that deficit is actually being held and is actually declining and getting closer to budget as we've progressed the year. And so where we are at the moment is that deficit has improved slightly on last month, and so that is the underlying deficit is now $500,000 within budget, which is pleasing to see. So we are confident, therefore, with regards to going forward, that our goal to end the year within that 1%, and even being a little bit more optimistic, getting closer to budget, if not on budget, is achievable at this time. Subject, obviously, to any unknowns, such as more weather events and those sorts of things, which are currently driving in cost. So therefore, just coming back and peeling back the layers of the actual position. So income itself is down nearly 23 million. You'll recall the bulk of that is capital subsidies with regards to a number of projects that are drawing on subsidies, haven't started or haven't hit milestones to achieve those to draw down on those subsidies. User fees itself are down on budget, and I think it's important to recognise that within that we are under quite immense pressure, in particular around the some of the areas such as events and venues. And so the world has changed a little bit as a result of people undertaking a number of conferences, the amount of spend that they're having on conferences, or the number of shows that are available in New Zealand for performing arts and those sorts of areas. And so what we are seeing is, in some cases, in particular the Energy Event Centre, incredibly busy, has a high utilisation rate. However, the people that are holding the events aren't spending as much on food and beverage as they once were. And so on one hand, the utilisation is up, but on the other, the revenues are down as a result of how they are choosing to use their spend. Planning and regulatory impacted with regards to subdivision consents, consents under resource management, and those sorts of things. And that's just a reflection of where we are as a country with regards to uncertainty around interest rates and those sorts of things, and people choosing when to do certain things. And in particular, the property markets are quite volatile. And so underneath of it all, there are some operational challenges that we do need to deal with. On the expenditure side, the bulk of that additional spend was a result of obviously the things that we talked about before around the emergency housing spend, community safety, but in particular as well, particularly recently in February and March as a response to costs as a result of Cyclone Gabrielle, and earlier than that Cyclone Hale. And we've tried to mitigate as much of that as possible by offsetting and deferring where possible. Capital spend is tracking about 40 million, nearly 40 million behind budget. I think underneath of that, though, it's still a spend to date of nearly 77 million. That is actually quite a significant spend, and in particular, a good portion of that is in the renewal of our existing assets and infrastructure, but also quite a heavy investment into growth, and in particular stormwater, with regards to some of the work that the infrastructure team is doing around stormwater retention and those sorts of aspects around the district. And as a result, our debt has slightly increased, and that's just a reflection of where our capital spend is. So we were projected to take on debt to support our capital works program, and so our net debt position has increased a small amount during the month as a response of our capital spend to date. So just talking about the capital subsidies, because this is one of those things we talk about recently as to why the revenues are down so much compared to budget. So the Rotorua Museum is one of those ones that we are currently out for consultation. So that next phase, no decision has been made. Within our budgets, we were anticipating when the plan was set that it would be underway and that we would receive nearly $15 million of subsidies, but obviously where that project is at, that's on hold. Rotorua, anticipating 3.7 million to support the additional cost that was into the delivery of that program, and you'll recall with the recent MFE discussion that it's unlikely that that milestone will come through. Tarawera Wastewater just hasn't achieved its milestone yet with regards to drawing down the MFE funding on that component. And the Aquatic Centre again as well, is that project is progressing well, but haven't yet hit the milestone to draw down on that subsidy that's available. So two of the projects there are just waiting to hit milestones, and the other two, one is not progressing, and the other one is not likely to be received at this stage either. I have a slide in there with regards to the user fees pressures, but I've already talked about that one. Capital spend. So with that, happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Thomas. Just a couple of quick ones. What's left on the lakefront project to be done? Just for the public's appreciation.
Just the whariwaka is the final component that's waiting to get done. I think the final stage is almost being completed, which is next to the the Rowing Club Yacht Club, and so those two, that should be completed shortly, and then the Whare Waka is about to have construction started.
Excellent, thanks. And then one that stood out was an additional 570K on security contracts. What are those? Are they part of the emergency housing expenditure?
Yeah, so that's in response to the challenges that we had with regards to the community safety, perceptions of community safety, and that was increasing not only our internal capacity around our community patrols, but also engaging external providers with regards to those community patrols as well.
Right. Yeah. And then 470K to process building consents. Did we have to contract in others to help with that?
Yes, we did, yes. So they are paying for itself, but because of the huge volume in that area, we are having to use external consultants to help the processing, and that's, while the costs are up, the revenues are all also up to offset each other.
Right, and that's because we don't have the capacity internally.
Correct,
Staff.
it is one of those areas where it's hard to retain and recruit. Those staff are in high demand throughout the country, so yes, we are having to outsource some work, yes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe te marukura o tira, tēnā kōrua. Thank you for the report. Engari tuata hea kia rā, kai te mihi tarura kia koe Uncle Trev. Kua tūranga tira nei tēnei wā, hei ringa matau. Ara, ki te kāwana tianara, nā reire mihi tunu ana. Anyway, to my kaupapa, more seeking a clarification around the milestones to do with the subsidies. So I just want to get it right in my mind. When the milestones are met, those subsidies will fall, and so that's correct, right?
Yep. So generally, each of them has each of them has a funding agreement with regards to when the funding can be drawn down, and it will be tied to a certain milestone. And so once those milestones are achieved, we file the paperwork with the external provider, and then the funds come across. And so in those circumstances of those two, we haven't achieved the milestones yet.
Okay, and does that have an overall effect on the final sum, I suppose, in our annual budgets?
So it doesn't have too much of a significant impact, because if we haven't achieved the milestone, because we're working towards it, we actually haven't incurred all the expenditure. And so once we've achieved the milestone, we've incurred all the expenditure to get us to that milestone, and then we get the subsidy. So it's just a timing.
So a timing
impact.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thomas, appreciate the presentation. Could we just talk about the net debt is 317 million. We've deferred 38, is that right? Have I got that right? Or is it the other way around? We've deferred 76.
We're underspent against year-to-date budget by about 38. Yep.
38, yeah. Will that 38 be put on top of the net debt then, or is that, so it'll be 38 plus 3?
Borrowings won't be required.
Do you project that debt forward? And one of the things I'm interested in is whether the projection for the debt includes the current proposal for the museum. So we're at 317, and also the other question I've got is what is our self-imposed maximum in dollar terms?
Yep. So a couple of things. So a couple of the items that with regards to not being completed this year have already been reflected in the draft annual plan with regards to the timing and the changing. One of those is the museum with regards to the existing funding that council has put aside in its new current draft annual plan, and some projects that are on there aren't being carried forward and won't progress. And so the draft annual plan that you're currently consulting on has taken into account a fair portion of the anticipated underspend in our capital works program, and so it is reflected in that with regards to the forward trajectory. With regards to our debt limits, if you want me to go into more specifics on that, just reminding everyone that council's debt limit is linked to its income, not to its asset base. So with regards to $317 million of debt. It is tied to predominantly delivering $1.5 billion worth of assets, but it is tied to our income. And so our self-imposed limit is 250% of our income, and so we're quite well under that at the moment. But within our LTP, we are projected to get close to that debt limit by year 2024-25, particularly 25, and that is on the back of the investment that's ahead of us. Predominantly, one of the big items is the wastewater treatment plant with regards to its $60-odd million renewal, but also other projects such as the museum. Within that forecasting of where our debt limit is, we only forecast the things that have been agreed to and planned, while also understanding what items may impact us on into the future. But at the moment, we are only forecasting out the current, with regards to the museum, the $15 million that we have currently in our plan set aside to support that project.
Sorry, one more, just for clarification then. We have suggested in the draft museum consultation document that we would take on more. So you just mentioned that we'd get close in the next couple of years with the current commitments. That is not currently sitting in there in those projections, so that would be on top. Would that take us over the self-imposed?
Yeah, so it's important to recognise that forecasting out our debt is not precise. While it's precise in an LTP, the LTP assumes that all the assumptions and all the timing of the projects are exact. And if you do everything that you say, then yes, that forecast debt position against our debt limit is precise. But the world we operate isn't precise, and so projects move and shift with regards to timing. Revenues go up and down as well, and council make decisions with regards to projects that you may want to do into the future or not. And so in isolation, looking at our LTP, that if you wanted to put more money into the museum, that yes, that would put pressure onto our debt limit and get us incredibly close to it. What that would mean, therefore, is some of the other things that you will need to consider going forward, such as stage 2 of the Tarawera sewerage scheme, completing Rotorua Rotorua, any costs with regards to potentially response to a natural disaster going forward would mean that you can go over your limit with a decision, but you would have to rationalise other expenditure if you wish to maintain and stay under that limit.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Chair. Thomas, just 2 questions just around the fees and charges. So parking revenues down as well as the energy event centre in Sir Howard Morrison. Given that COVID's been over for a while in terms of lockdowns and things like that, what's our strategy going forward to drive additional parking revenue, or are we going to readjust our forecast for that so that we don't have a parking revenue deficit, which seems to have been on the books for quite a long time?
I'm not too sure on where that one is. I'll have to get back to you on that one, but I think we do need to have a look at the budget target that we have set in that area. You'll recall within the draft annual plan that you are going out for, that we are proposing an uplift in those parking fees, and part of that uplift was recognising the shortfall in the budget. So that is partly the response to mitigate that.
And the second question was just around the events, where I think you said lower events income as well as lower sales of food and beverage. So what's the strategy in terms of that? Because between those 2 things, there's nearly 700,000 behind budget. So is there a strategy being?
Yeah, so my understanding is we've had some preliminary discussions with Stuart, and Stuart is putting a little bit of a project team together with regards to working on a strategy to work towards offsetting that going forward.
And just one final thing. It did mention in the report that council received $530,000 worth of ticket sales for the NRL, and I think we're still waiting for a wrap-up report in terms of that event.
Yep, so I believe that closeout is incredibly close, and I would anticipate a report back to you in the next month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the Chair. Sorry, Councillor Kaifong has taken the rug from underneath me, Thomas, but thank you for your presentation. Just to follow up, could I ask, and Mr Williams may wish to add as well, could I ask, we have obviously some underperformance in the event centre. I'm just concerned because we have the new Christchurch facility opening up fairly soon. I believe Wellington opens up later this year, and then of course late next year we have the Auckland Convention Centre. So I would hope that that strategy is also looking at, particularly with the flight access into those cities, compared to our more somewhat, shall we say, limited access. I would hope that we're taking that into account about how we're going to compete in that market space. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Were there any further questions? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you for your indulgence, Your Worship. Just one more question. The Sir Howard Morrison Centre, are we expecting any more bills on that?
With regards to the structure, no, we are finishing off some final pieces to get final code of compliance, which is currently underway. And the last update that we gave to you with regards to our forecast position, we are likely to be at least $500,000 under the estimated cost. But we are just currently tidying up loose ends, such as the actual construction itself has been completed. Now it's the utilisation and how you use the facility, and there's a couple of minor items such as quality of chairs, screens, kind of those amenity aspects that are currently just getting taken care of to make sure that the facility is at the level that we expect. But it is forecasting, as I said, to be at least $500,000 under the approved budget.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Any further questions? There appears to be none. I did just have, I'll come to you soon. I did have one quick question, Thomas. In this report really reflects a significant spend on infrastructure, and as you've mentioned, this has been on growth. So while on one hand we are down on the financial and development contributions we're expecting from developers, it's quite clear in the report with the processing of building consents that there is still a significant amount of growth happening. Are those building consents around residential or commercial growth, or a bit of both? And sorry, that may be a JP question.
Your Worship, I think there is actually just a steady, there's a mix coming through. One of the things we've got to the next committee meeting is some detail about what we've seen is still a continuing bow wave of building consents coming through. So there's some more detail of that. So there is definitely a mix of increased numbers of building consents, but still some steady general business consents.
Thank you. I think it's important to know that as well for elected members, because as we continue to grow, the housing is not only necessary, but of course ensuring that we have business, whether it's commercial or industrial opportunities to grow jobs as well. So while there unfortunately has been an increase in spend on needing additional contractors to process the building consents, I do think that is a positive thing that we're ensuring that those are getting processed as soon as possible for that growth. Councillor Kaifong, you had a question?
Just a comment when you're taking comments.
Thank you, Thomas and David. That concludes the questions, and we'll now open for any discussion.
Just a quick comment, Thomas, while you're there, before you and David leave, I just wanted to thank you and David for the hard work, and also Jeff. We had set a pretty ambitious target that we wanted to be back with a balanced budget, and I think that there have been a lot of strategies and heartache implemented to try and bring that back within budget, and to get to where we are today, I think is a magnificent achievement. I know we've still got another month to go or so, but thank you for the hard work, and I think if it could also be extended to the wider staff, because I'm aware that it has been hard on the wider staff as well, given that we're holding staff vacancies, so they're having to work a lot harder, fill in the gaps, but also because it's created extra work for them around having to sort of fill in extra forms to get sign-off for payments. So I think from our perspective, or certainly from mine, I think an extension of congratulations to the wider staff would be appreciated from my perspective, just to thank them for their efforts as well.
Tautoko.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? We'll now move to our next agenda item, which is the Rotorua Partnership Review. We're on page 15 of our agenda. I ask a mover and a seconder to receive the report, Rotorua Partnership Review. Moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Brown. All those in favour to receive the report, please say aye. Against, carried. And would like to invite our DCE, Gina Rangi, to overview the report.
Kia ora tātou. I'll take the report as read. I wanted to highlight a couple of practical things, just in case there are any questions. The first is that the working party that is being proposed is made up of equal numbers of representatives from Te Tatau and representatives from the council, plus an independent chair. The purpose of the working party is to make a recommendation back to both parties. So in time you will receive the report and you will need to make your own decision about the recommendations and what the next steps might be. And Te Tatau will also have that process as well. And we'll need to think about how we bring you together to discuss and make final decisions. I think those are probably the most important things that I wanted to highlight, was the nature and scope of the review and the working party's powers. And really I wanted to just take questions, I think, on any matters of detail. One thing I would note is that I received an email this morning from Te Tatau advising that they had reviewed the draft terms of reference. They were largely in support, because they need to approve them as well separately. Largely in support. They did ask whether there might be a process to have to, and the wording in the email was to maintain the status quo while the review is going on, noting that I've suggested in August report back. So two things I want to note. The first is that the August report back is simply to give a bit of a direction to the working party on expectations. If they're making good progress, you may wish to give them more time. But also, if they finish earlier, they can come back to you earlier. But I really wanted to give them a sense that this is not an everlasting process, and that there is an expectation that there will be a report back to the council and to Te Tatau. So that's the purpose of the August indication of a time frame. The second thing is that in terms of the status quo, I think it is quite hard I don't know that we've got a process for identifying what that would be. One of the reasons for the review is that the committee structure has changed, both in terms of the functions of the committees and also their powers. So the status quo, it's not clear to me what that would mean in this context. So I don't have a recommendation in that respect, but I did want to note that that was the request from Te Tatau that the council consider. Are there any questions through the chair?
Any questions on the report? Yes, Councillor Waru.
Kia ora, Morena Gina.
Morena.
Tēnā he pātai, he paku noho tēnei pātai, but I'm just wondering the time frames. I like it. I like the flexibility. It's cool, but August seems quite far away for me. And I think we're pretty eager to get cracking. But also, will there be, as Te Tatau reports, their kōrero to council, when is the time for council to report to its partner?
So the process will be in the working party. So there will be discussion within the working party, and it'll be for the working party to decide the list of issues that it wants to, or opportunities and that it wants to work through, and working through that list to come back with a set of recommendations. And those can be, I've indicated a scope there. So clause 1 of the terms of reference for the working party is the purpose and scope of the review, and you'll see that it is quite broad. It gives some direction around how do we better implement the Te Aroha vision, how do we integrate the establishment of Māori wards to make sure the partnership is effective. So it gives some purpose to the review, but it will be for the working party to define and work through the issues.
Thank you.
Any other questions? There appear to be none. It's pretty straightforward. I appreciate that it is still only just a start of a process that then, of course, I'm sure we will have some good discussion around this table once those recommendations come back. If you could just scroll up a little bit more. I have proposed in order to get this cracking and not have to wait until the next council meeting to appoint the representatives, that we also at this meeting appoint the following people to be the Rotorua Lakes Council representatives on this working party. So I've proposed that council appoint Deputy Mayor Councillor Sandra Kaifong, our Māori Ward Councillor Rawiri Waru, Deputy Chair, and also our Rural Councillor Karen Barker, Deputy Chair, and then myself as the alternate to the working party. Now, how the alternate works is that in the chance that someone of that three couldn't attend the meeting, the alternate then goes along, and bearing in mind that I will be away for 1 month very soon. So that's the proposal before us. Were there any questions or discussion on that? Councillor, oh, sorry. I'll take a mover and a seconder so we can then open up for discussion. And I think we'll be fine with any questions. For Gina, we can take any questions from here. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Waru, seconded by Councillor Brown, and we open up for discussion now. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an issue that I have taken an interest in, and I did campaign on it. I would certainly volunteer myself for a position on that working group, and I might even put up a little flag in the direction of my friend Councillor Waru. I'm wondering whether there's a wee bit of a conflict of interest in that he was previously a board member of Te Tātou. And so I would propose an amendment that would put myself forward.
You have proposed an amendment. You will need a seconder for your nomination of yourself, if there are any, and then I, of course, would have some comments to that. Yeah. Is there a seconder to consider the appointment of Councillor Lee to this? And sorry, I'll just take 1 minute to check that this is the correct process. Thank you. I just wanted to check as well, because there was a other part of that we swap out Councillor Rawiri Waru as well, which I'm sure he'll have some thoughts on. Yes, but the correct process at this time is there has been a mover and a seconder for the discussion. There has been an amendment proposed by Councillor Lee. There will be required to have a seconder for that to progress at all, for then discussion or on that item before we finally put it to the vote. So is there a seconder for the removal of Councillor Waru and the appointment of Councillor Lee? I'm very sorry, Councillor Lee, there appears not to be a seconder for that, so we will refer back to the original appointments, which is Councillor Waru, Councillor Karen Barker, Deputy Mayor Sandra Kaifong, and myself as the alternate. Were there any other discussion on this item before I put that to the vote? Yes, Councillor Waru.
Nā koe te marukura, o tira tātou katoa. Just a comment, yes, I was a previous member of Te Tātou Aotearoa, previous being the operative word here. Things were put in place for this very reason. So I could still participate in these things here. And yes, I am Te Arawa, and so is our Matua Trevor, and so is our Mayor, and so is Councillor Kiriopa. So that's not a conflict I see. I could very well maybe flip it the other way and say, well, you, Councillor Lee campaigned on getting rid of this partnership. Well, that might not be quite the right words, but he wasn't keen on this partnership as it is. So that's a conflict in itself too. So I'll just leave it at that and say, oh, good on you, Rob. Ka pai putting your best foot forward. Ngā mihi nui, kia ora.
Thank you. And you do acknowledge that since that time you have stepped down, so there is no conflict. And in fact, we would appreciate your expert opinion on these matters as well. So we do have that moved and seconded. We've had some discussion on it. Thank you very much, Councillor Lee, for proposing the amendments for us to consider. I'd like to put that to the vote now. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? That's carried. We now move to our next agenda item. I do just want to note that on the agenda in the public excluded, we had an item for Infracore Limited financial update in May 2023. Because it is of public interest, we have requested that before we go into the public excluded, we'll have the presentation by the Infracore members, and then followed by questions before we head into public excluded to receive the staff reports and, of course, open up for discussion. So I'd now like to invite our Chief Executive, John McRae, our Chair of Infracore, John McRae, and also Chief Executive, Emma Murray, to come forward and present to a PowerPoint presentation. And we also welcome our board members as well. Kia ora.
Morena. I think you probably know Brent Wibley on my left here, and Tupero Morrison, famous for his beard. Sure you've seen him around town. So I guess today, there was a number of questions. Did you want to, sorry, Worship, sort of introduce the question process, or get stuck into the presentation?
I think if we get stuck into the presentation, we'll let you get through all of the presentation, and then we'll open up for questions. And if you could just move the mic close as well for anyone live streaming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. So what we've done here is just paint a little bit of context as to how we ended up in a deficit position to where we're forecasting by year end. And we'll take you through the current situation as well. So a lot of this is well known to you all, but it sort of sets the scene to the environment that not just Infracore's in, but the whole of New Zealand, the business community and the commercial community are within. So back in when we set the budget, we had inflation running at 5%. And at that time, that was a pretty heady number that we're trying to get our heads around. 5% was, given we'd come from, inflation time of, the low ones, even 0.75, we were hitting 5%. You put that on your budget and you go, that's a significant impact. And that's what the board signed off at that time. Now, what happened during this year was even worse than we had expected and the economists had expected, and we actually had an inflation rate that was running at 7.4%. So we're already on the back foot. And this is not just us. I'll re-emphasise this is not just us. This is the whole of our economy, New Zealand, and we are just a small, tiny part of that. Next slide, please. The other thing that was happening at the same time, only 3.2% employment, which is the lowest it's ever been, which is obviously too low, which has been driving massive wage inflation, which underpins especially an organisation like ours, which is obviously wage heavy. The component of our biggest component of our work is actually our workforce. So we are a service organisation that is driven by people. So we had in New Zealand a 5.8% increase across the board. But when you're looking at what's happening in our area in particular, manufacturing inflation was running at 12.1%. Now, I couldn't get any numbers that were specific to infrastructure, but the manufacturing and infrastructure running very close together there. So we actually had a wage inflation of 12.1%, and that certainly feels about what we actually did have, which is a great concern to the whole of our community, economic community, but obviously great concern to us. We'll move on to the next one, Emma, please. So the flow-on effect to that was we ended up in a forecast, we're forecasting to the end of this financial year an operating loss of 124k. We had hoped for, our budget was for a positive number. We never actually go for a high profit. We're not there for making profit. As a CCO, we're actually there to deliver as much of the services we possibly can for the funding that is available. So we're running at 124k operating deficit. The assumption here, though, is that that 124k does not include the overhead charge of 190k, which is money that comes from us to RLC, and that's a traditional amount that was put in place to recognise some of the finance services, IT services, HR services that we used to use, which we don't use a lot of in this day and age, but the funding's been flowing through. And it, at a consolidated level, it has no impact on the consolidated group. So the 190k is on our side of it, it's negated on your side of it, so there's no actual financial difference to RLC. It does have a cash flow pressure on us though, because it actually relates to cash flowing from us back to RLC. So that's the major impact that it has. Now the rent is 300k, and that's obviously property that's owned by RLC. In the past, when we've struggled, we've actually negotiated to not pay that, but we've factored that in. So if you add the 300k on top of the 124, our projected deficit is sitting at 420k. But that excludes the 190k of overhead. Now, how we ended up in this position was pretty much the key to it. I'll go back to the previous slides, which is around inflation and, of course, staff shortages. The staff shortage impact during, that November to March period was particularly bad. With wage inflation increasing, a lot of workers right across the whole community were shifting very quickly to an employer who was offering a few cents more per hour. And we saw a lot of people shifting right around that whole infrastructure and manufacturing community, chasing the extra cent. So that was causing the inflation, and employers were actually paying it because they were desperate to get work out the door. So that was driving the wage inflation process. And we were very much part of that community and subjected to that. So we ended up having 24 vacancies, which for us is quite a massive number when we're talking 130 in total. 24 vacancies at that time. Yeah, at that point in time, yeah. We also had another problem going on, which was our weather. And we had grass growth rates that were through the roof, literally. And that was putting a lot of pressure on our team to deliver our core contract. So we were shifting a lot of our available capacity that we did have into making sure that we're achieving the base contract that sits around about $5 million. And that was where our resource was concentrated on. And that's where the need was for our client, which is obviously RLC. That's the work that we needed to do. That's where we needed to put our capacity that we had, noting we're already 24 vacancies down. So the impact of it is quite significant to us. We would normally expect to get around about 3.3 mil for projects, and projects are over and above, the core contract that we have in place, and that has a variety of stuff that goes on, and it's piecemeal work, but it's very important work to us, and it tends to hold a slightly higher margin for us as well. That drives it down to the bottom line. In fact, we only achieved 600k of our budget at 3.3, simply because we didn't have the capacity in our system to actually do the projects and drive the revenue to 3.3. So we ended up with a shortfall of 2.7 million, which in the scheme of our organisation is very significant. Now, we did have savings in staff costs of $1 million, and we did have savings of $1 million for consumables. So the actual impact on the profit from projects alone was $700K. So you will have noticed that, back some time ago, we had a forecast that was a lot higher deficit than what we're currently forecasting now. And you can expect a board like ours to actually, and a CEO and team like ours to move very effectively and efficiently to actually bring that down. So we brought that number right down to a projected operating loss of 124K, or it's probably going to sit at 420K when we recognise the rent amount that's paid for the land we occupy. Move on to the last slide. So I guess, the important here is to sort of learn. But as a learning organisation, we've got to reflect on, how the year went and what can we actually do to make it a difference. And one of the key things, I'm going to start on item number 3 here, is our liquidity and balance sheet needs more resilience, and I'll keep looping back around to that. A little bit of context for new councillors more than those who have been around for a while. 8 years ago when the CCO was set up, the reason for it being set up was primarily because the old system, if you like, it was called Castle Court, which was a component of council at the time, was recognised, and I was part of the Deloitte team that did the report at that time, it was recognised that it was a very inefficient way of doing it. We were benchmarked at the time, and it was seen to be probably you were paying twice the amount that you should have been compared to the marketplace back in that time. So a big driver to move it to a CCO was actually either privatise it or put it into a CCO. And the council at the time made the move to put it to a CCO and to drive efficiency. Now, we're looking at about roughly about a 12 mil revenue at the moment. And at the time when we started the CCO, that was about 16 mil. If you actually put that money in today's ability in terms of its spending power, you would be looking at equivalent of 20 mil today. So we're looking at 20 mil then, we've got about 12 mil today. So that efficiency has really driven through the organisation, and that was the intent. There's no surprises about that. That was the intent of putting these services into a CCO, which was to drive those efficiencies. But there comes a time where you actually go, those efficiencies are turning into too lean, and we've got an organisation now that needs more resilience in terms of its balance sheet and liquidity. So what we've done, item number 1, we've been able to get another 17 FTE back into our system, and that's really important. So our ability to actually deliver is back on track. In the last 2 months, we've bet our budget. We're doing better than budget, and that's why we've been able to also climb back to the position that we're at, where we're forecasting now. We've also sorted out the cash flow timing, which was creating a lot of liquidity issues between the two organisations. There was stuff that, and a big thanks to the finance team to actually help us through that. We've actually got the cash flowing as it should on time, and we're not having hiccups along the way. I've talked about building resilience. That's obviously we need to think about, going forward, which is really about number 4, which is the important part. The current contract is very piecemeal and it's very itemised. It's not actually meeting your needs or our community's needs. So we're putting too much capacity into areas that don't need the work, and we're not actually putting capacity into areas at the time when we do need work. And that's the design of the contract, so that the team at RLC and our team are working hard to stick to contract. The contract is actually at a large extent at fault here, where we're actually over-servicing and under-servicing and not getting it right. So we've got an independent person coming in who's doing initially a pricing review, but it's also looking at the structure of those agreements. And I know Emma and Araru and Rob have already, started those discussions and starting to get their heads around, okay, what's a more appropriate way to actually contract for the future? Now, that'll actually drive where the capacity should actually be sitting and making sure that we've got a better look and feel to all our open spaces. That's the outcome that we want. It also has to recognise, what is the appropriate amount to be paid for these services, so that we're actually making sure that as an organisation, we've got the right resilience built into our organisation long term. Now, there's also other things that we're working on, which is around making sure that we've got efficiency between the two organisations. There's a lot of administration that need not be done or could be avoided, and Jeff and the team and our team are working really hard to actually try and mitigate that. Some of that will come from the contracting process, so that we've simplified that and we're not getting into the level of detail and scrutiny that is not adding any value to the look and feel of what the community actually receive. And that's the key driver to it. I'll just ask any of my fellow board members if I missed anything or anything to add. All covered. It's quite surprising, isn't it? Yeah, great. Thank you. So open for questions. There's one more slide, but that relates to the 9:35. It's probably better to take questions right now and then talk to that afterwards.
Questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, Emma, board members, thanks for the presentation. Can you talk a little bit about the independent review of pricing? Can you give us some confidence that it will be independent and we'll get a look? And sorry, second question is, does the contract currently carry a CPI component going? Hasn't? Oh, no. Thanks. For the record, I think you speak into the mic.
Just in terms of that independent review, so that's a collaboration between us and RLC, and it's very much an open book process that we're going into. So just in terms of that independent review, it is an external party, it's not either side. And what we've committed for Infracore is doing a desktop pricing exercise, so bottom up, so that we can give that information, our current contract price, and then obviously what this independent view will be. From that point in time, we just need to work through the commitment from both entities so that we can see exactly what that looks like moving forward for Infracore.
And for the record, CPI is not currently in your contract?
In our parks component, there is an inflationary adjustment. It is not CPI. So there's a book value adjustment. We've done sort of CPI adjustments across our core services, and cumulative over the years, that equates to around 6 million that has not been received by the CCO had we used CPI as an adjustment.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John and Emma and Tupura and Brent. I want to go back to the line of questioning that I had raised at the previous meeting when you reported to the performance measures on the Statement of Intent. And I had some concern that out of the 10 measures, there was significant underperformance there. And in particular, there were a number of areas where you had decided not to measure, where there was non-achievement. And in particular, I was concerned at that time around the strategy which was put forward by Infracore in your Statement of Intent, which was that you were going to drive some additional commercial work and contracts for income. And the measure was that you decided not to measure it and that it was on hold. And you've just given some figures there around the shortfall in that project revenue that you anticipated. So you went in with a strategy to actually increase that projected revenue from those types of contracts. So what was the sort of strategy that you had in terms of trying to drive that additional revenue?
I think go back to a couple of slides, that's why I sort of set the scene, is I think a lot of us in the business community had plans to grow. If you're a service organisation that requires people to grow, and you've got a shortage, that's off the table. And I think that's been off the table for most of New Zealand. I don't think we're particularly unique in that space. So I think, can I just get clarification around your question? So you're saying with the project funding, the 3 point...
You
Why
originally
didn't we
had
achieve that?
3.3 million,
Yes.
which was actually an increase on your previous year's budget, I think, of about 1.4 million in terms of what you were projecting to grow from that type of revenue.
Yes.
And so you've just said that the reason it didn't grow was because you couldn't get the people, but you had a strategy that was to increase that growth. So, what sort of work were you trying to target? I mean, at the end of it, you had the people issue, but you must have had a strategy to try and achieve that additional revenue.
Yeah, so we actually had to find an actual pipeline of work. So in that pipeline of work, so Dave and Emma had presented to the board. I don't remember the actual detail of the projects. A number of projects that were coming from RLC that were already in the plan and were going to be committed to. I can't remember the actual, if there were many outside of RLC revenue. You would have a better recall than I do. Yeah, so there was a table, there's a pipeline of work that was actually sized up. So that gave us as a board confidence that we were, the management team and what was being put forward in terms of a budget at that time was achievable. And it was scrutinised at that time. Life moved on from there, as explained before.
Sorry, just some further questions, just by way of clarification. So if you've identified that there was a pipeline of work and a plan, are you able to share that with council so that we can have some idea of what sort of work was being sought? Because you've just said a pipeline of work, but I don't actually get any sense of what that was or where it was going or who you were going to be seeking this additional work from.
Don't have a problem with that. No, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And then was there as part of that sort of pipeline of work, any thought about whether or not council might be an opportunity for additional work? Had there been any discussions in that regard?
Some of the pipeline of work was definitely in discussion with, Emma having discussions with the likes of Rob and probably Stavros and so forth to actually identify those pieces of work. So, yes.
So you had some discussions.
Yeah.
So was there a sort of a target as to what would be a percentage of external growth from external contracts as opposed to just coming back to council for looking for internal work from council?
Don't really understand your question given the answer I just gave before, but when you've got a pipeline of work, it's usually you identify the actual projects. So we'd have a number of projects saying it's, I don't know, what you've got an example for me, Emma, that you can give on top of your head?
Stormwater component.
Yeah, stormwater component that will have an identified amount of X dollars attached to it. We see our costs being this much attached to it in terms of consumables and wages. Of that, we would expect our profit margin to be that, so that builds up part of your pipeline of work. So then you'd have another, I don't know, however many of those pieces of work identified that gives us a reasonable level of confidence as a board to sign off the budget on. So that's just standard practice. That's nothing new to us. It's what we do in the commercial world every day. So you don't put a budget unless you've got a pipeline of work, that you've got a reasonable level of comfort that you're going to actually land this work. Now, go back to the beginning of the presentation, which was very much, if you don't have a team, you don't have an opportunity to actually deliver. And then, of course, we had that high growth rate of grass where our capacity was actually shifted back into doing more core services, probably in the scheme of things, over-servicing to contract. That's what was required and that was needed by the community. That's our job, to respond to the community need. So
Yes.
that's where a lot of our capacity actually went instead of into projects.
Just one final question then. I suppose I'm just really struggling to understand, because that was such a significant part of the revenue driver for Infracore, that whilst you had a pipeline of work, you had a plan, but then you had a staffing issue, but there didn't seem to also be any plan to try and deal with that issue of staff and how you then brought back the project revenue into play, and that you just simply decided, well, it's too difficult, I'll just grey line it and I just won't measure it and answer it in terms of performance measures against your statement of intent.
Kia ora. I believe we took the measurement piece out of that KPI because there was an instruction for us to focus on council-specific services rather than the additional work. So because there was that instruction, there was not the drive for the last quarter, 4 or 5 months probably, in that space. So just to concentrate on core service. Can I also, though, come back a little bit, and that is when we set the additional revenue budget, that was on the back of the huge support that we had from council in the prior year. So all the teams, Thomas, Rob and all that, there was additional work streams that were coming in. And that's why we had that ability to do some of that repayment of debt in the prior year as well. So looking at those models and work that was coming in, we actually had quite a lot of confidence and faith that some of that work was going to continue on and actually help with us. So there's acknowledgement to RLC as well in that space and actually gave us that confidence. But I believe the KPI reporting was because of that change in the SOI for our focus. So that's why it was removed as a KPI, not because of we decided that we weren't going to achieve it and remove it, as with some of the other KPIs where it was chosen not to measure was on a similar basis.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe te marukura. Morena, tēnā koutou. Thank you for coming in and giving us a bit of a kōrero around what's going on there at Infracore. You know, I certainly have still a lot of mihi, la raroha for ngā kaimahi o Infracore. Hoi anō. Just my questions around cash reserves, either in this current financial year or even in the year before. Have there been cash reserves used, or have there ever been cash reserves used either the year gone past or in this current thing to prop up operations?
Yes. Yep.
And just out of curiosity, given the position that's been sort of painted here, not just here, but, you know, over the past how many months, a lot of pressure on everybody. Because I was trying to ascertain through the reports how much of that reserve there actually was and has been used, if I can ask.
Oh, look, we're heavily reliant on our bills being paid to us on time and us being able to pay as on time. We keep, as per the Companies Act, keep a close eye on the definition of insolvency and making sure that we are always within the 2 metrics that are set in front of us. But you know, it's tough times, and we, like I said, we don't have resilience in our balance sheet to be able to take, you know, too many hits.
Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your report. Just a couple of questions for putting it out there in the public so people who want to find out what's been happening. Firstly, with the staffing issues, when Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Waru and myself attended the AGM, at that time there were 18 short, which was pretty frightening to think about. 18, that's a lot. And then I read that it went from 18 to 24 in a very short space of time. What happened? Was it all to do with poaching, or was there anything else involved?
So from the AGM, it was the 24 that we talked about. So with any organisation, when you have vacancies in place, it's a moving target. You don't just take your 24 vacancies and accept that for the business. So at our very peak point of vacancy, it's 24. There's been a huge push in the organisation on building resilience in the HR team, ensuring we have the right people in place to get recruitment up and running, and actually finding the right people for the organisation. An operational world is very different to even the council environment, and the people that we're looking for, the rates we're actually able to afford, it's really tough to find those right people. layer on top of that, our drug and alcohol policies, making sure that we get the right people in place, and really just the reality of Rotorua and the people here. It's tough. It's really tough.
Thank you. Supplementary? And just one...
I do recall Emma had presented that those staff vacancies had improved significantly at the quarterly update
That's
as well.
right. Yep. And then just around the... Note here. The... lost my train of thought now. No, pass.
Would you like us to... We can come back to you if
Okay.
you remember. Any further questions? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Your Worship. The council get asked questions by the media from time to time, and as councillors we get a heads up on some of those questions, and you'll recall over the Christmas period there was some concern in the public about the mowing had got behind. One question that was posed to the council was had there been a walkout of staff at Infracore? I wonder if you could comment on that.
The answer is no. Any issues that we have in terms of employee relations obviously have a level of confidentiality that we're unable to speak about in the public arena.
Yeah, I think that's... I think the staff vacancies have been covered in this discussion sufficiently. Did you have another question, Councillor Lee?
Sure. Could you elaborate on what would qualify as the right people for the organisation?
Something we've been working on for even just, the last few years is culture. So getting the right people in place that really care about the environment that we have, and everybody at Infracore that works for Infracore has that in themselves. You can just see that in the work that's provided. I mean, lots of the work that Infracore does is completely invisible to most of the community. The fact we have people up at 3 o'clock in the morning sweeping the streets, the public toilets that get cleaned on a daily basis, 7 days a week. You probably do see the vans driving around on your weekends as well. And that's care and love. And that is what the people of Infracore have, is care and love. We consider all applications for roles, but as I'm sure you can understand, some of our roles are incredibly difficult to fill. They're not attractive in terms of the work, and that means that you have to find the people that truly care about this community to fulfil those roles. Any input from the table in terms of how we can promote the company and promote the work we do would be greatly appreciated, because we do everything we can to make Infracore a really great place. The values piece of work that we did was part of that process as well.
Okay.
Do you want to just add one little thing? On Monday we had a full team meeting, and actually I would encourage all councillors to actually attend one of those all team meetings. You will see a massive camaraderie amongst that team. You mentioned in the last meeting something about where the culture is actually live, or was it woke, I think. If you turn up, you will see that it's very much embedded in the organisation. And in terms of the difficulty in recruiting some of those roles, some of the things that we're seeing in our health and safety is that our team is actually getting abused by members of the public. We actually have to look after those team members as well. And so to actually go out and put people into that environment knowing that they're going into a rather difficult and frustrating piece is quite concerning as well. But I would just encourage everyone to actually turn up to one of the meetings and actually see exactly what Emma just said about a passion and about a love for an organisation.
Great. What time is the meeting?
We'll get some details and we'll discuss, Councillor Lee, whether it's appropriate for councillors to attend.
I would just say as well, in terms of our people, they're in the community all day, every day. Feel free to have a conversation. Feel free to have a conversation about the work they're doing, about the work we're doing at Infracore, and just have that conversation with them. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to share.
Okay.
We'll go. Did you have another question?
That'll be fine, thank you.
Do you have another question? That's fine.
Yeah, at council here, the staff are able to go on noho marae, and I think that's pretty encouraged. Is that available for the Infracore staff?
Yes, we've actually been trying to get that working all year. So hopefully, I believe there was a COVID period where it was on hold, but it's something that is absolutely front and centre for the organisation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go Councillor Barker, back to Councillor Patterson, and then Councillor Wing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just considering my question, I've just rethought it, and I wonder whether the content of it might be better to ask if you will you be available to answer questions in the confidential side of things, or is that?
We can pass on any additional questions you think may have any
Thank you. I'll
sensitivity to.
I'll leave it for the moment. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry about that. Had a bit of a brain fade, but it's come storming back to me. We had a kōrero with a councillor evening here during the annual plan conversation, and we had two of your team argue very strongly that what was suggested in the annual plan is not a good idea and that it would have severe financial implications on the business. When you're doing your projection for next year, have you factored, like we haven't made that decision yet, the deliberations are next week though, so have you made those sort of deliberations yourselves as to how that would impact you going forward?
It's probably a good segue to our last slide if you'd like to, we could move to that one. No.
You want to do that now? Or?
Yeah, we certainly can. Yep. So there's nothing in there that can't be for the public open session. Yep. Otherwise, we could leave it to confidential if you think there's issues here. No? Okay. So the 935 impact, when you look at the consolidated position, the 935 will mean a 935k loss for Infracore. It'll come straight off our bottom line. So at a consolidated level, there is absolutely no savings to the group. The impact on us is we will have to, over the period of time, there'll be a loss of FTEs. And in the session, we've got an idea of that, but can't disclose. There would also be redundancy costs, which will actually mean that that process will be more expensive.
Sorry, Madam Chair, if I can say, I think we should put this in confidential. This is my kōrero.
This is okay.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. So then, obviously, if there's redundancies, there's a significant loss of capability. And some of that capability is been with us for a long time, and the very specific skills of which we would not be able to get back in any time. So that means that, as a community, we actually lose that capability for a long term. So the recommendation here is that if there is any consideration of going ahead with this, and I would suggest that it probably wouldn't, but if there was, then we would highly recommend, I'll stress that, you highly recommend that you actually work with us, the Infracore team, to really thoroughly understand the implications before a decision is actually made on this issue. There's a lot of detail. We have a good understanding of what that would look like, and I think in a confidential session, you need to understand what that would look like.
Just adding to John's kōrero, in terms of the Infracore business, we're working obviously with our unions. We've flagged the 935 as a potential revenue reduction. At this point in time, that is what that is. It's a potential revenue reduction for Infracore. It is currently out for public consultation, and that means that the public will decide, and you guys will decide what that looks like for the future of all of the group. We have told the unions that, and we have said that 935,000 is a 10% reduction to our revenue. And at such point in time, if a decision is made to remove 935,000 of revenue, the business will need to bring everybody back in and discuss what that future looks like. So at this point in time, it is a proposal. It is not confirmed, and there is nothing confirmed from Infracore.
Thank you very much. That summed that up well. Sorry, we may go back to a different topic now because we'll go to Councillor Wang and then we'll take a final question from Councillor Waru.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll slightly touch on this as well, but thank you all for your presentation, and I want to send a thanks to the hard work that your team does as well. And I think that those rumours that you faced in terms of the culture and everything was incredibly disrespectful to your organisation and your team. And actually, I find that quite irresponsible that that rumour was being shared around. But I just wanted to kind of understand maybe for all of us around the table, the state of the facilities that you are operating in, and also the ageing assets that you are having to operate with as well.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. This is a really sensitive topic. So obviously when you're creating a culture of care and love and quality, when you have a facility as tired as the Vaughan Road premises, that is really hard to instill. So standing in front of 130 people saying, I care about you and I care about the future of this organisation, when you look around to a boardroom that floods, to office space that's inappropriate really for this time, and really just buildings and parking areas. I'm sure those of you that have been to Vaughan Road can really see that. It's not right for the organisation, and I do hope moving forward that that can be looked at for the future of Infracore, to really give a space that reflects the care that goes into the community, so they have a space to eat their lunch somewhere that is beautiful, that reflects the beautiful work that they do, versus the current situation.
Councillor Waru.
Just a quick question. This particular slide with the information on here, has it been shared with other staff, with your staff?
Yeah, so like I said, we had a meeting with the union, so we've talked about the 935, and we have an internal intranet. We've been discussing the 935 with the people. So basically what we've done is anything that's come from the public arena, we've been sharing as we go. So the only information we have at this stage is what's in the annual plan. We know what that looks like from the contract, but as we've talked about before, this is bigger than just the 935. This is looking at how the service delivery looks moving forward, and that's a much wider conversation than just 3-star, 4-star, 2-star, 1-star. This is what is the outcomes that this room seeks, and what can Infracore do to really reflect the service delivery to match that. And that's the piece of work that is crucial through this process.
Just a supplementary question. Are all staff part of the union?
Not all staff are part of the union, but we've talked about this. Again, we had our Monday meeting and we talked about this session. So we talked about the fact that we'd be discussing the 935 and the impact on our people. And we welcome people to come and talk to us about it as well. And we've had a lot of feedback from our staff, our gardeners, and, just getting out there with them, you can see that they love the work that they do. There's a real level of aroha, of love, and you can see that. So it's personal.
Thank you, Emma. And actually, apologies to you, Madam Chair or Madam Mayor. The reason I was saying we should put in confidential, I must heard something I didn't know it was actually already communicated to the staff. So then I wait.
And thank you very much for checking. So that concludes our questions. Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming to present. We appreciate you doing this in public as well. And we also appreciate you taking a number of questions that have been posed this morning. So thank you very much. We look forward to finding much better solutions in future. So, elected members, I now need a resolution to move into public excluded. We'll go into public excluded and then we'll take our morning tea break before we return and complete the agenda. So I just want to advise that there are 3 items for consideration in the public excluded session. We have the Infracore Limited Financial Update made, we've just done that. We do have a staff report on that though to be received. And we also have the renewal of contract Rotorua Library Services and Audit and Risk Committee appointment of independent chair. That's been added as an urgent item. The reasons for going into confidential are for financial performance and discussion on performance, to enable any local authority holding information to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage, and for negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations, and finally, to protect the privacy of natural persons. So I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the motion. Sorry, Councillor Maxwell, did you have a question or are you moving?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something, Madam Chair. Before the group go into, before my colleagues go into confidential, I'll need to sign out from here because I'm not in a confidential place where others might hear what's going on. So I'll leave now and catch up when I get back home over what's happened in the confidential section, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much, Councillor Maxwell. Congratulations again, and we look forward to celebrating alongside you. Ka kite anō.
Ka kite anō. Ka kite anō.
Thank you. So I've given the three items, the reasons for going into confidential. May I please have a mover and a seconder that Council move into public excluded session? Moved by Councillor Waru, seconded by Councillor Kai Fong. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. We'll now take a short 15-minute break. We'll return at 11:15 and continue on with our agenda items. Thank you, councillors.